Hello, this is Rocky Marciano. When I was heavyweight champion of the world, they called me the Brockton Blockbuster. You find out why.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Rocky Marciano archives and to the continuing story of Rocky Marciano as he rises through the ranks of heavyweight boxing in the late 1940s. I'm John Cameron, and today I'll be reading another chapter from my own work, Redemption, the Life of Rocky Marciano, Volume 1, 1923 to 1949. And just to assure all of you out there who have asked the question, Volume 2 is coming. I'm just getting so much material now that it's becoming quite overwhelming. So thank you all for your support, and if you like this kind of thing, if you're a fan of Rocky Marciano, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share these videos. Thank you. Let's get into the fight that nearly never was. When he got in the ring against this kid, I realized he had more than a punch. He had a brain too. Then I began to believe in him. Charlie Goldman. Marciano and Colombo returned to Brockton after their New York adventure. The journey from their exile in the big city, which would leave a lasting impression on them both, especially Rocky, was nevertheless nowhere near as eventful as their travel back to Providence just a few short days later. The morning of November 29th was a patchwork of ice and snow as temperatures in Massachusetts dropped below zero. Despite the adverse weather, Rocky knew he still had to be in Providence by 2 o'clock that afternoon for the ritual weigh-in. Tartaglia had promised to drop by and give the boys a lift. Ali's car, he felt, was not up to making the journey. Conditions were treacherous, but Tony was confident. He had just purchased a brand new 1948 DeSoto sedan and felt that he would have little problem traversing the conditions that were better placed in the Rhode Island auditorium on a Sunday night hockey game than on the roads of a New England winter. It was a confidence misplaced. The car that morning was full, for alongside Marciano and Colombo in the back was nestled a mutual friend, Joe Fidel. Whilst riding up front with Tony was his younger brother George. At first the ride was easy enough, that is until they stopped at lights near the bridge that brought them into East Providence. As the lights changed and they pulled away, the car began to skid wildly. The next I knew, recalled Colombo, we smashed into the side of a truck coming the opposite way. The two front doors flew open and Tony and his brother George disappeared. I was stretched out on the pavement, remembered Tony Tartaglia, who had been thrown face first onto the asphalt, yet, amazingly, suffered only superficial damage. He watched as the car skidded crazily down the street towards the bridge abutment. It looked like it might go over into the river. All three remaining passengers who were in a car without a driver had been slammed back into their seats by the force of the collision. Ali, desperate to avert a catastrophe, leaned over the front seats, grabbing the emergency brake, pulling as hard as he could. The wheels of the DeSoto locked, sending the car sliding wildly on the ice before bouncing off a guardrail and eventually, after seemingly careening forever, coming to a halt. The police were soon at the scene. Remarkably, it was only George Tartaglia who was taken to hospital that day. He had suffered concussion when he'd been unceremoniously dumped out of the car. Everyone else was apparently unhurt. At first, Colombo, erring on the side of caution, advised Rocky that they should call the scheduled fight off. Everyone involved was shaken. Besides, they were late for the weigh-in now. Marciano, however, was adamant that he would not renege on a bout. even if he was a little sore and cramped. He wanted his chance to show Connolly that the sparring match was an aberration. In the ring, for real, Marciano was a totally different animal. Luckily for the fighter, a passing motorist gave the 4 casualties a lift into Providence, and leaving Snap's new pride and joy an abandoned wreck which had to be towed away. Once in Providence, Marciano ate his usual hearty steak dinner before, amazingly in light of the near tragedy, falling asleep. Meantime, Ali had phoned Manny Almeida and replayed the accident. Almeida advised Colombo to bring Rocky to the auditorium at 7, where the Rhode Island boxing commissioner would examine him. Thus, at the appointed time, Marciano turned up, was looked over, and pronounced fit to continue. However, all was not that simple, for after he had awoken from the 2-hour nap that afternoon, Rocky had trouble moving. It appeared that his back, which had been injured all those years before falling out of the cherry tree, had finally given out on him, helped no doubt from the jarring force of the crash that day. The incident aside though, Rocky had recently been experiencing stiffness in his lumbar region, yet he had put this down to merely pushing his body too hard in training. It would work its way out, he reasoned. However, now he was in pain. It may have been fortunate for him that it was a commissioner who gave him the once-over that evening, and not a physician, or the bout would no doubt have been cancelled. To Rocky it may have appeared that he had staved off once again the infamous malocchio, or evil eye, that he believed had plagued him since childhood. Once in a while Mum went to see Mrs. Lucy Parzial to fight off malocchio. It's like some kind of curse. The only way to get rid of it is to see someone who can break the spell, like Mrs. Parzial, Marciano would recite in his ghosted autobiography, which appeared in the Saturday Evening Post in 1956. Mum would take something that I used against my body, like a t-shirt, and give it to Mrs. Parzial. Mrs. Parzial would fill a deep dish with water and dip a teaspoon of olive oil into it. Then she'd recite some words and dip her finger in the water. If the oil didn't spread out, Mum knew nobody was putting the evil eye on me. But the more this oil spread, the more people were giving me this malocchio. This was not the only superstitious practice Marciano, or at least his family, practiced. For as Rocky continued, before every fight, Barbara went to the priests at St. Coman's Church and got one of them to bless my boxing shoes. Then she'd mail them to me. There were 3 priests, Reverend Leroy V. Cooney, Reverend Richard O'Donovan, and Reverend John Morrissey. They used to take turns. One would bless my shoes and I'd knock a guy out in the first round. The next fight another might do it and I'd take 2 rounds. Then the third would do it and it might take me 3 or 4 rounds. We always said we wanted the 1-round priest to do it. Whatever the reason for the auto incident, accident or design, Marciano would seem to be followed by this malevolent force all of his life. His back would plague him for the rest of his career. Yet this night he somehow made it to the bout, despite Ali having to stretch the lower and middle ropes apart so that his friend could gingerly enter the ring. The fortitude that Marciano now showed in entering the ring this night was perhaps more down to his exasperation at the ups and downs which had led to him not fighting for pay for 8 long weeks. Originally he had been scheduled to face Don Riffey once again, this time in Boston on the evening of Monday 11th of October, but this had been postponed until the following week due to a cold suffered by the headliner on the card, namely former Marciano victim Bobby Quinn. Despite his ferocious and decisive defeat to the Brockton battler, Quinn, or rather his handlers, still held some sway in the local rings. Rocky, thwarted for now, had returned to New York to work out his frustrations, and in doing so had damaged the knuckle on his right hand, forcing him to pull out of a meeting where he was set to face not Don as intended, but rather Jimmy Freeman. Little is known of the perennial no-show Riffy, or Riff, From looking at his record, he appears to be another of those ever-present journeymen who flourished at the time, winning some and losing more. His record is filled with names no one now even remembers. And if little is known of Riffy, even less is known of Freeman. His record is sparse. However, he does hold the distinction of holding the young Cuban Nino Valdez to a draw over 6 rounds in 1948. Marciano would be forced to rest up for 3 long weeks, at least in terms of using his fists. But Rocky could not just sit around. He was always on the go, always moving, recalled Angelo Dundee. Even when he was injured, he had to do something to stay in the game. That's why even after his long layoffs, he still had the stamina to compete, despite the rust. And boy, did he rust quicker than most. The problem was not just boredom while he was out of the ring, it was that he was also not getting paid. He desperately wanted to earn money, money to pay his family, to pay back his friends, and, more importantly, to prove that fighting was a means of escaping the realities of a mundane existence. So now that his date with Connolly was made, he wasn't going to let anything else stand in his way. Before the bout, Rocky sensed the need for urgency when he confided to Ali that he wanted to get this one over with quick. He really was worried that his back would give out completely. This, coupled with his opponent's feeling that he had got the better of him in their sparring sessions, seemed to spur Marciano on. The local press would have us believe that they were the best of pals, but Connolly's derision and Marciano's contempt seemed to imply that this was probably a piece of spin used to sell the fight in Providence, where both had ties. Rocky, through his string of victories, and James due to the fact that he once worked in the city as a plumber's apprentice. When boxing was really big, the most innocuous of connections would be used to tie a prospect to a place in order to build a following. This fight was short. Rocky must have had the 1-round priest for this one, when, after a mere 57 seconds, he caught his opponent flush with a right hand to the jaw, sending the Irish descendant crashing to the floor, where he was counted out. In fact, so swift and decisive was Rocky's victory that Connolly only got to throw 2 punches, both of which missed, before he was set up and knocked over. Connolly managed to rise at 9, but the referee, on seeing the now familiar glassy-eyed stare, called the proceedings to a halt immediately. For Connolly, it was the 6th setback against 8 wins, all 6 losses coming in his last 10 outings as a pro. Like the majority of Marciano's early opponents, he would struggle gamely on for a further 12 months before calling time on his career, one that initially promised so much. In his final year before the crowds, he would partake in 7 more bouts, losing 3. At the end, he knew his fire was gone. For Marciano, this was win number 11, 10 under the auspices of Weil, and all coming within the distance, none going beyond the 3rd round. When Weil, who had remained in New York, was informed of this victory by Goldman, he decided it was time to show off his new prospect, and he had just the show to do it in. Thank you for listening to that one. I appreciate your time. I hope you got something out of it. Next time, it's 1 step forward. I'll see you down the road.
If you like this content, then hit the subscribe button. To really support this channel, consider joining for just over $1 a month and unlock ad-free members-only content. Every member will play a key part in revealing the real Rocky.
I just enjoyed combat. I just enjoyed the sport that I had learned so well, and I had practiced so much that when the bell rang, I did a job. I could concentrate on the opponent.
It was a great, great career for me. I'm proud and very happy to talk about it. Sometimes I wonder why I was such an aggressive man in the ring.